I work as a cleaner in a corporate building downtown. There are multiple floors, each occupied by different companies, and I always work alone on the night shift when the office is empty and quiet. But one thing has always intrigued me: the 10th floor. I've never seen anyone going in or out, and the door is always locked. I was told not to worry about it, but as the weeks passed, my curiosity only grew. Sometimes I'd hear faint sounds coming from there. A click, maybe the sound of a keyboard, but every time I tried to check, the door was closed and locked. It was strange, but I tried to ignore it. One night, after finishing cleaning the other floors, I decided to pass by the 10th floor again, as usual. But this time, I noticed something different. The door was slightly open, a detail that immediately caught my attention. I felt a chill, a sense that something there was off, but curiosity got the better of me. I entered slowly, trying not to make any noise, and soon realized that this floor wasn't empty. Instead, I found several desks with computers on, papers scattered, and documents that didn't seem to belong to a typical company. That's when I realized what I was looking at. My heart started beating faster as I moved further into the floor, trying to understand exactly what was going on there. There were screens with personal data, IDs, banking information, details that seemed to belong to countless people. Everything was organized into piles and spreadsheets, like a well-coordinated operation. I realized this was something far more serious than a simple consulting firm or anything like that. It was a large-scale fraud operation involving identity theft and financial scams. I realized I was right in the middle of something dangerous, a place where I clearly didn't belong. With each passing second, I felt the danger growing. My mind started spinning between the need to get out as quickly as possible and the fear of drawing attention to myself. I knew that if someone saw me there, it might not end well for me. But at the same time, the thought of just leaving and ignoring it all seemed unbearable. I backed away slowly, trying to remember every detail I saw, but without making a sound. At that moment, I just wanted to return to my regular shift, far from whatever that was, and forget I ever set foot on the 10th floor. As I walked toward the exit, I heard a sound that made me freeze in the middle of the hallway. It was the sound of footsteps coming my way, someone climbing the stairs leading to the 10th floor. My heart felt like it was pounding in my throat, and all I could think was to hide. I looked around quickly and found a small maintenance room with the door slightly open. I slipped inside and crouched behind some boxes, trying to control my breathing so I wouldn't be heard. Through the cracks in the door, I saw a man walk past, holding a stack of papers with a serious expression, as if he was checking something. That moment felt like an eternity. I stayed there, motionless, listening to the man moving around, shuffling some documents, maybe making sure everything was in place. All I could think about was how to get out without being seen, but any movement felt too risky. When I finally heard the footsteps receding, I waited a few more seconds and then slipped out of the room. I tiptoed down the hall to the door, and as soon as I reached the elevator and got inside, I felt a wave of relief mixed with the terror of what I had just witnessed. Once I left the building, my body was overwhelmed by a mix of relief and fear. My first thought was to call the police and report what I had seen, but the idea of getting directly involved in the situation made me hesitate. Who were these people? Would they know it was me who reported them? What if this was something bigger, an organized network that could easily find me? I walked to the bus stop, trying to control the trembling in my hands and the feeling of being watched, even though I was far from that ominous floor. I had no idea who else might be involved, and the sense of insecurity only made me more anxious. That night, I could barely sleep. The faces, the piles of documents, the man in the hallway, it all played over and over in my mind. I knew I couldn't just ignore what I'd seen. It was a criminal operation, and I had stumbled into it by accident, but I couldn't shake the fear. Part of me thought I should just go on with my life, pretend I'd never set foot on the 10th floor. But at the same time, I was haunted by the idea that those people would continue with their fraud, stealing other people's identities, without anyone to stop them. The following days I tried to avoid thinking about it, but it was impossible. Every time I entered the building for my shift, I felt that same chill down my spine, like the 10th floor was watching me, knowing I knew its secret. I even started changing my route inside the building to avoid going near the door, afraid that someone might see me or that one of those responsible might be watching. I didn't know if anyone had noticed I'd been there, but the paranoia grew with each passing day, like I was carrying an invisible weight. Every step I took inside the building, I felt a constant pressure, the fear that I might be confronted at any moment. Finally, I decided I couldn't handle it alone anymore. I talked to a trusted friend, someone who knew what it was like to work in places where you didn't always understand what was really happening behind closed doors. He suggested I make an anonymous report, and that gave me a bit of courage. I spent a sleepless night thinking about the consequences and the risk I was still taking, but I knew I wouldn't have peace while those people operated freely. The next day, I gathered my courage and made an anonymous report, providing every detail I could remember about the scheme on the 10th floor. The feeling of relief was immediate, but there was also a lingering worry. For weeks afterward, I waited for some sign that the police had discovered the operation, but I never saw anything in the news. Going back to work was still uncomfortable, and I avoided any unnecessary contact with other employees. Every night when I arrived, I looked at the elevator and the button for the 10th floor, hoping that one day it would be permanently blocked so no one else would enter and discover what I did. To this day, I don't know if they were caught, if they moved somewhere else, or if they're still there, operating as if nothing happened. All I know is that my life was never the same after that night. I became more cautious, more aware of my surroundings, and eventually quit working in that building. Sometimes, I have nightmares, imagining that the people from the 10th floor found out I was the one who reported them. But despite the fear that still lingers, at least I know I did the right thing. It was supposed to be a peaceful trip. I was driving alone, crossing the country to visit my family during my college break. It was already past midnight when I noticed my gas tank was almost empty, so I pulled into an old gas station in the middle of nowhere. The place looked like it was from another time, dimly lit with only one attendant, a middle-aged man standing behind the counter. Something about him made me uneasy, but he was polite. He filled up the tank and even offered to check the oil. Still, I couldn't shake the chill I felt as he looked at me in an odd way, as if assessing my every move. When I finally got back on the road, I started to relax, relieved to have a full tank and an empty road ahead. But shortly afterward, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, maybe someone else driving late at night. But as time passed, the car stayed behind me, keeping the same distance. I tried speeding up a bit to see if they'd pass me, but the car just matched my speed. That's when I remembered a recent news report about disappearances in this area. My heart started to pound, and a wave of panic washed over me. The road was completely deserted, with no sign of civilization, and my cell phone had no signal. I felt trapped, like I was in a trap with no way out. I looked around, trying to find a side road or some place where I could pull over and get help, but all I saw were trees and darkness. I decided to slow down to see if the car would follow suit, and it did, staying at an almost calculated distance. That's when I realized I was really being followed, and they didn't plan to leave me alone. The only thing I could do was try to lose them. I took a deep breath, trying to control the fear that made my hands shake on the wheel. I started making a rough plan in my head, calculating every move. I saw a tighter curve up ahead and decided that as soon as I took it, I'd floor it to gain some distance. With any luck, they wouldn't react fast enough. As soon as I rounded the curve, I pressed the gas pedal to the floor, feeling the engine roar as the speedometer climbed quickly. My heart was racing, and I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror, focusing only on the road ahead, hoping the gap between us would grow. After a few seconds, I couldn't resist and glanced back. To my horror, the car was still there, speeding right after me as if it had no intention of giving up. That deep fear, the kind you only see in movies, started to mix with a feeling of desperation. I didn't know how long I could keep up that speed without losing control of the car. With the dark, winding road, I could feel the fatigue and tension weighing on me. In a moment of desperation, I noticed a dirt road on the left, almost hidden by the trees. I decided it was my chance to try something different. I slowed down quickly, turned off my headlights, and took the dirt road, trying to be as quiet as possible. I parked behind some trees, turned off the engine, and sat in complete silence, holding my breath. While I was there, hiding among the trees, I tried to calm myself down, but my nerves were on edge. My whole body was trembling, and every tiny sound seemed amplified in the darkness. I waited a few seconds, watching through the rearview mirror, trying to see something through the branches and darkness. My heart almost stopped when I saw the headlights of the car passing slowly down the main road. They slowed down, as if they were looking for me, and for a moment, I thought they were going to turn down the dirt path where I was hiding. But thankfully, they continued on, driving away. I waited a few more minutes, not daring to move. Every second felt like an eternity, but I knew that leaving my hiding spot too soon could ruin everything. Once I was sure the car was far enough away, I carefully started the engine again, moving slowly back onto the main road, trying to keep as quiet as possible. This time, I drove with my lights off for a few minutes, trying to keep my distance and avoid being seen. After a few minutes of total tension, I finally saw the lights of a small town in the distance. It felt like a massive weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I accelerated a little more, now feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion wash over me. When I reached the town, I parked in front of a police station, still trembling. I went inside and explained the situation to the officer on duty, telling them everything that had happened since I stopped at the gas station. They listened closely and mentioned that they were aware of reports of disappearances in the area, though they hadn't yet identified any suspects. I spent the night at a local hotel, unable to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see those headlights following me and remember the fear I felt on that dark, empty road. The next day, I finished the drive during the day, still trying to process what had happened. Even now, whenever I see a car behind me for too long, that panic creeps back, like a memory I can't erase. It was the most terrifying night of my life, and I just hope no one else has to go through that. I arrived at that hotel exhausted after a long day of meetings and hours on the road. I chose the place because of its reputation. It was known for being safe and comfortable, the kind of place you book without a second thought. When I entered the room, everything seemed in order, but I soon noticed a faint cold draft, like there was an airflow coming from somewhere I couldn't identify. I thought it was odd since the windows were closed, but I didn't pay much attention to it. I convinced myself it was all in my head, just the effect of exhaustion and the silence that felt almost oppressive in that room. After a while trying to relax, I started hearing faint sounds, almost like muffled footsteps. I found myself looking around, but I didn't see anything unusual. I tried to ignore it and focus on my work, but that unsettling feeling continued to bother me. That's when I noticed that the large mirror next to the bed was slightly out of place, as if someone had moved it. Curious, I got up to take a closer look, and with a gentle push, I discovered something that sent chills down my spine. Behind the mirror, there was a hidden door, a kind of secret passage I'd never expect to find in a hotel of that caliber. The initial shock left me frozen. I stood there, staring into that dark, narrow corridor, trying to comprehend what was happening. It was like stepping into a horror movie scene, but it was real. The passage led somewhere in the back, and, even more disturbing, it seemed to have been used recently. There were footprints in the dusty floor, and even some items, crumpled papers, a broken pen, as if someone had passed through there not long ago. The thought that someone might be using that corridor to enter and exit rooms sent a shiver down my spine. I felt a growing sense of dread, but I also knew I needed to act quickly. I went back into the room, trying to stay calm. I had to alert the hotel staff, but the idea of telling them also made me apprehensive. What if someone on the staff was involved? Suddenly, everything felt suspicious. Every small detail that had seemed insignificant before now took on a new meaning. I decided to go down to the reception and discreetly inform them of what I had found, without drawing too much attention. But as I explained the situation to the manager, I noticed he exchanged a quick glance with another employee. The kind of look that suggests something unsaid. That look immediately put me on high alert. They tried to keep a neutral expression, but I knew something was wrong. The manager assured me they would investigate and that I didn't need to worry. But there was a coldness in his tone that only heightened my discomfort. He suggested I return to my room and wait while they checked things out. But the last thing I wanted was to go back to that room and stay vulnerable, knowing they might be involved. I felt a chill, like the situation was slipping out of my control, and I decided I couldn't trust anyone there. As soon as the manager stepped away, I quickly returned to my room, grabbed my things, and headed for the side exit, trying not to attract attention. I felt like every second counted, and the thought of staying longer in that hotel felt far too dangerous. As I walked down the hall, I had the distinct feeling some of the staff were watching me, as if they knew I had discovered something. I left the hotel as fast as I could, not looking back, and only felt relief once I was safely in my car, far from that place. As soon as I left the hotel, I drove straight to a police station in the nearest town. I told the officers everything that had happened, including the secret passage behind the mirror and the suspicious behavior of the staff. They seemed to take the situation seriously, and one of the officers mentioned that they had heard strange reports about that hotel in the past, though nothing had ever been proven. Hearing that only increased my relief that I'd gotten out of there in time. The police said they would investigate and advised me not to return to the hotel or mention anything until they checked into details. For the following days, I was constantly on high alert, checking my surroundings, afraid someone might find me. I never heard any more about the investigation, and to this day, I don't know if the hotel was shut down or if anything was ever uncovered. All I know is that since that night, I think twice before trusting places that seem safe at first glance.